like to turn to the book of Exodus, chapter 14. Exodus 14. We'll begin reading with verse 31, which is the last verse, reading through verse 3 of chapter 15. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord, and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he hath thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. And then if you go to verse 22, and we'll read through verse 4 of chapter 16. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and ordinance, and there he proved them. And said, If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians. For I am the Lord that healeth thee. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water, and 70 palm trees, and they encamped by the waters. And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month, after their departing out of the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full, for he have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they walk in my law or no. And then in chapter 17, read the first 3 verses. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, and said, Give us water, that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is this, that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? As we all know, Israel, throughout Scripture, serves as a type of God's people. And more so in the book of Exodus than any other place. And in the text, verses that we've read, we see them in a variety of events, variety of circumstances, variety of experiences. From chapter 14, verse 31 through verse 21 of chapter 15, we see Israel, they're in a place of victory. They've crossed the Red Sea. There's praise. And from there, we see them in verse 22, in a place of bareness. There's no water. And from there, in verse 23, we see them in a place of bitterness. There's water, but they're undrinkable. From there, verse 27, we see them once again in a place of abundance, place of refreshment, place of enjoyment. From there, in chapter 16, we see them once again in a place of bareness, and the Lord miraculously supplies. From there, they go to chapter 17, to a place of great need, and again to a place of abundance. So what we see in these various events and circumstances and experiences is the faithfulness and miraculous provision of God. We see God's grace. We see God's mercy. We also see the fickleness of God's people. And we see that they were very much governed by their circumstances, and they failed to learn from their circumstances and experiences. And one of the greatest spiritual failures of Israel is that they did not take what God manifested to them in one event and take it to the next. Now, last week we mentioned we have this habit of taking our failures from yesterday into today, and then on it goes. But there's also this failure to take what God teaches us from one day to the next. That we are to take from one day to the next. We have a tendency to take what we shouldn't take to the next day, and what we should take, we forget. And that's human nature. But it was a prevailing problem, and it is today as well. Israel failed again and again to thrive spiritually from one event, from one experience to another. And for the most part, God's people fail in the very same way today. So we want to speak on spiritual thriving in the events and experiences of life. As we all know, we're not going to we're not going to enjoy every event in life. We're not going to and we're not going to enjoy every experience in life. But I do believe that God has lessons for us in every event and every experience. And I do believe that it is our responsibility to thrive spiritually in every event and every experience. And I believe that should be our desire, to grow spiritually in every event, in every experience. So as children of God, we're not called upon to merely survive spiritually from one event to the next, from one circumstance to the next, from one experience to the next. We are called to thrive spiritually from event to event, from circumstance to circumstance, from experience to experience. We are to be thriving spiritually. We're to be growing spiritually. In each event, each circumstance, each experience, there is in that event, there is in that circumstance, in that experience, that which will strengthen us spiritually. And we need to realize that. In each event, each circumstance, each experience, there is the hand of the Lord. And the failure of Israel was that they were usually too caught up with themselves in the events, in the circumstances, in the experiences of life, that they failed to see what God had for them. As a result, they just continued in their own spiritual rut. And there is such a thing as thriving spiritually. But it does require a right use of the events, a right use of the circumstances, a right use of the experiences in life. Paul wrote in Galatians 6 verse 10, "As we have therefore opportunity, let us." And I believe that each event gives us an opportunity to grow spiritually. Each circumstance, same thing. Each experience, same thing. So in everything there is spiritual opportunity. Again, it may not be an event we like. It may not be an event that we would have ever chosen, or a circumstance or an experience, but there's something there for every child of God. So the failure of Israel and the failure of God's people today basically is an oblivion to what does God have for me in this event, in this circumstance, in this experience. Can I thrive spiritually in this? And the answer is yes, you can. So consider the salvation experience. The book of Exodus opens with the children of Israel in Egyptian bondage, type of the bondage that the unsaved sinner is in. God had a deliverer in place, Moses. In Exodus chapter 12, there's the blood of the Passover lamb slain for his people. Exodus 14, God through Moses miraculously brings Israel to the banks of the Red Sea. Pharaoh's armies are in pursuit. By the almighty power of God, Moses stretches forth his rod, the waters roll back, and Israel crosses over on dry ground. And when the last Israelite crossed over, Moses again stretches forth his rod, and God let go of the waters, and Pharaoh and his army are swallowed up. They had victory. It's one of the most miraculous things you read in all the Bible. The crossing of the Red Sea. For Israel to escape the land of Egypt was a powerful miracle of God. That is just a type. It is a shadow. It is an outline of the salvation of a soul. You and I that have been saved have experienced something greater than the type. We've experienced something greater than crossing the Red Sea. We have been liberated, released, rescued from a bondage far, far worse than Egyptian bondage. And we have been loosed from the power and grip of one far more fierce, far more cruel, far more powerful than Pharaoh. So following this miraculous exodus, we see there in Exodus 14 verse 31, "And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord." They had a reverence for God. "And they believed the Lord and His servant Moses." And then in chapter 15, there is a scene of euphoria. These delivered, emancipated, redeemed Israelites, with hearts overflowing with awe and reverence and thankfulness and passion and all the desire they had to glorify and honor and exalt God. And they break forth in song. And here is a people. They're singing. They had just personally witnessed, personally experienced the miraculous power of God. They have personally witnessed and experienced God roll back an impassable obstacle. They have witnessed and experienced God defeat their enemy. They have witnessed and experienced God basically bury their past. And they're absorbed with the one who redeemed them. There's no murmuring. There's no complaining. Everyone is praising the Lord. They are a people with a new position. They have a new life. This should serve as a foundation for the rest of their life. Again, it's a picture of our salvation. Our salvation experience should establish a foundation for all future events, for all future circumstances, for all future experiences. In other words, they need to carry with them the experience of a miraculous salvation. The remainder of their lives should be building upon this foundation. The day that God saved my soul. They need to carry with them the reality of their redemption. They need to carry with them Exodus 14:31. That they do not get away from that. They need to carry with them the awe, the reverence, the thankfulness, the passion, the desire that overflowed their hearts in Exodus 15. But that's where they failed. And that's where God's people fail today. And that brings us to their wilderness experience. In Exodus 15, verse 22, they went out into the wilderness. It's a place of uncertainty, humanly speaking. It's a place of many complications, many stumbling blocks. But keep in mind what God has just done for them. It is a place of dilemma. It is a place of difficulties. There would be many annoyances in the wilderness, many inner disturbances. It was a place of suffering, a place of anguish, a place of pain. The conditions of the wilderness, whatever they might be, do not change or undo the miracle that God had done in their lives. Nothing changes that. Whatever events we go through, whatever circumstances, whatever experiences, nothing changes this fact: God saved my soul. Nothing changes that. Nothing undoes that. That is a firm foundation. We read, they went 3 days in the wilderness. So what's happening? Well, they're getting further in time from their Red Sea experience. 3 days isn't that long, as we all know. But they're getting further in time from their Red Sea experience. And we read of this event. They found no water. As the hours passed, in day 1, no doubt it got a little more difficult. And even more so on day 2. And even more so on day 3. There was no water. With each step, each passing hour, it would become more and more difficult to pick up their feet and to continue on. There they are, in a barren, desolate place. They're becoming exhausted, parched with thirst, in desperate and urgent need. Again, none of this changed or undid the miracle that God had done for them just 3 days prior. But they're getting further removed from it. And after 3 days, they'd forgotten all about it. They'd forgotten about it before the 3 days. And they're just moving further and further away from that miraculous work of God in their lives. I believe things would have been different had sometime in day one they began to just think about what God had just done. And things would have been different if they would have stopped and thought and meditated upon and maybe discussed what God had just done for them at the Red Sea in day 3. But that's not what happened. They just kept getting further and further removed from what God had done. So here's a people gloriously and miraculously delivered and redeemed by God. And they are by grace and mercy of God, the very people of God. Nothing changes that. They had just witnessed and experienced God roll back the Red Sea, defeat their enemy. Nothing could change that. Nothing could undo that. But they're getting further and further from the actual event. And the problem is, because it's not a problem that we've gotten further and further from the day of our salvation. That's called time. That's not the problem. The problem is they're losing sight of the event of redemption. That's the problem. When we begin to lose sight, however long it's been since you've been saved, tomorrow there'll be another day further away from that event. But again, that's not the problem. The problem is if we lose sight of that event. At some point, I'm sure their walking turned to staggering. And I myself just imagine someone in that crowd of people, that mass of people, looked off in the distance and saw the sun glistening off a pool of water. And someone says, "There's water ahead." And those that are stumbling, their strength is revived. Their pace picks up. They're thinking there's relief up ahead. And they begin to imagine and think about, oh, how good that water is going to taste. And the anticipation is building. And for a few moments, they have forgotten their suffering because of the anticipation. They reach the water. Several rush to the water, drop to their knees, begin to lap up the water, and spit it out. Can't even swallow it, for they were bitter. Their hopes have gone all the way down. Disappointment rolls over them. And the anticipation that they were feeling at the thought of water is now turned to frustration. There are frustrations in life. But we better be careful what we do with them, how we react to them. We read in verse 24, and the people, the very same people who are singing 3 days prior, murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" In other words, Moses, what are you going to do? 3 days between euphoria and murmuring. Most commentators will say they murmured because of the bitter waters. That's not so. It appears to be the reason, but it's not the cause of the murmuring. And the events and the circumstances of life are not really the cause of our murmuring. It might be what we're murmuring about, but it's not the cause. The cause of the murmuring was that they have lost sight of God. They have lost sight of God's redemption. They have failed to take with them into the wilderness in Marah, Exodus, what they felt in Exodus 14:31. They have failed to do that. The very same people who 3 days ago sang, "The Lord is my strength. He is my song. He is my salvation," are murmuring. The very same people who said, "Who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like unto thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praise, doing wonders?" Doing wonders. Now they're asking, what are we going to drink? Moses, you got to fix this. What are we going to do now, Moses? Where are we going to find water now? It's nothing but desert. Who's going to show us any good now? So when they ask that question, what shall we drink? Their question voiced a complaint. I've had that happen many times. Pastoring, someone will say, "I've got a question for you." Yeah, and what it was a complaint. It wasn't really a question that they want an answer for. So we can voice a complaint through a question. 3 days ago, they were standing on the shore of the Red Sea, victorious, singing glory to God. But they've lost sight of that. Their faith in God has evaporated. You know how quickly our faith can evaporate? Doesn't take 3 days. It didn't take 3 days here. It was almost as soon as they got out of sight of the Red Sea. People murmured against Moses. Had they taken with them into the wilderness those 3 days, their redemption experience, if they would have continued singing what they sang in Exodus 15 for those 3 days, they wouldn't have murmured at Marah. So the problem really isn't Marah. The problem is the Israelites. And so it is today. The problem is not our events, not our circumstances, not our experiences. The problem is when we lose sight of God. Failure to take their redemption experience with them. resulted in them being governed and controlled by their wilderness journey. We all have a wilderness journey, and there's going to be many Maras on the way. But we can't be governed. We can't be controlled by events, whether they be good or bad, by circumstances, by experiences. While Israel was murmuring, we read in verse 25 that Moses cried unto the Lord. And the Lord showed him, Moses, a tree. And as you read on, it's no doubt God had instructed Moses to cut down the tree and to cast it into the water. And notice, verse 25, which when he, Moses, had cast in the waters, those bitter waters, poisonous waters, the waters were made sweet. So when God provided and revealed a tree, and that tree, when it came into contact with the bitter and undrinkable water, soaked up the bitterness and dispensed sweetness, and a miraculous transformation took place. And once again, God has done the miraculous for them. And then in verse 27, God brings them into a place of pure and plentiful water, a place where they would have shade and the refreshment of God. But from there, they were once again brought to experience the bareness of the wilderness. God gave them a little break at Elim. Gave them some rest. God does that. We read in chapter 16, verse 1, and they took their journey from Elim. And all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin. So they journeyed from Elim, and that was the name of this wilderness, Sin. It's between Elim and Sinai, into this place called the wilderness of Sin. It's now been 30 days since they miraculously were redeemed from Egypt. And here are the redeemed of the Lord, led by God into the wilderness. Once again, this time their resources are depleted. Once again, verse 2, and the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured. Now they haven't carried Mara with them. And you listen to them there in Exodus 16 and 3. They revise history. They make Egypt sound like a good place, like they had it made there. How twisted thinking becomes when you get removed from God. So God had miraculously shown up in their lives in Egypt. God had miraculously showed up in their lives at Mara. God had provided them Elim. They have experienced in a miraculous way God in their lives. Every child of God, I don't care who it is, has experienced in miraculous ways God in their lives. And at the Red Sea and at Mara, they were shown the almighty presence of God. At the Red Sea and Mara, they were shown God can. God can. We can't, but God can. At the Red Sea and Mara, they were shown God cares. God's going to take care of us. At the Red Sea and Mara, they were shown the faithfulness of God. At the Red Sea in Marah, they were shown the sufficiency of God. God has everything we need. They were shown that. At the Red Sea in Marah, they were shown that God was their resource. At the Red Sea in Marah, they were shown the provision of God. They were shown their dependence upon God. At the Red Sea and at Marah and at Elam, they were shown that glorious possibilities exist. Not because of us, but because of God. But there was a failure to take all of these wondrous truths into the wilderness of sin. And as a result, they're trying to figure things out. They're trying to figure things out. How many of God's people do that their whole life? Now, we got to figure this out. How many times has God shown up in our lives which tell us loud and clear, you don't have to figure it out. I've got this. We fail to learn those lessons. So you listen to them there in Exodus 16:3. And basically they're saying to Moses and Aaron, your deliverance of us has put us in a place where we can't even survive. They've forgotten their experience of God's ability to take care of them, to provide for them. They have forgotten their experience of the wisdom, the power, the goodness, the love, and the faithfulness of God toward them. It's like those things never happened. It's like the Red Sea never happened. It's like God making the bitter water sweet never happened. It's like God providing Elam never happened. They have forgotten. They failed to take these things into their next experience. And now they're dealing with anger and exasperation. They're saying, why have you brought us out here to die? All hope is gone. And they begin to long for Egypt. Any child of God that longs for Egypt has forgotten their salvation experience. They've forgotten all about it. And again, they're under the control of their circumstances. Not because of the wilderness, but because they've lost sight of God in their lives. And now their hearts and minds are back in Egypt. The attitude of their heart is far from God. And there they are. Miraculously redeemed people. A people loved by God. A people who have personally experienced the greatness of God. But they failed to carry these things into the next event. And there they are, being governed and controlled by the event. But here God, after they said what they said in verse 3, chapter 16, behold, verse 4, I will rain bread from heaven for you. God's grace, God's mercy. Notice it is, I will for you. And that's what God does in His people's life day after day. They murmur, they complain, they gripe. They say foolish things. And God says, I will for you. Notice verses 11 and 12 of chapter 16. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. I have heard. We need to think about that for a while. I have heard their murmurings. Speak unto them, saying, at evening ye shall eat flesh, and in the morning ye shall be filled with bread, and ye shall know. See, this was their problem. This is what the Lord is addressing. Ye shall know that I'm the Lord, your God. That's what we need to know, and that's what we need to carry with us every day. So God blessed them abundantly with food. Then you come to Exodus 17. They come to Rephidim. And we read, and there was no water for people to drink. Now you would think somebody would say, hey, we've been here before. Remember what God did? But that's not the case. They had the same circumstances shortly before. And notice, because of the failure to take with them the miraculous experience of God, they have the same response. And the people murmured. Again, it's like the past experiences never even happened. Never even happened. God can do something miraculous in our life, and I guarantee you, we'll get over it in a short time. That's just what we do. That's our nature. It's as if it never happened. Well, this is different. Well, it may be, but God's the same. So it doesn't matter if it's different. But once again, they're under the governing power of their circumstances. In verse 7, they even ask, is the Lord among us or not? They're asking a question, but they're complaining with their question. And God answers by giving them a miraculous victory over Amalek. God's grace, God's mercy. So as you look at these events, we see a frightening cycle. One far too often that mirrors ourselves. The truth is, we fail to see that each event, each circumstance, each experience is a spiritual opportunity. And there are lessons. There are lessons about God. In each one of those events, God was there. And there were truths revealed about God. Instead of getting so focused upon the event or the circumstance or the experience, and we all do it, focus upon Him. There's something there for us. We often find ourselves controlled by events. We often find ourselves paralyzed by trying circumstances. But I believe what all of this teaches us is that we need to see and learn God in each event. Again, there's events we do not like. There are events we can hardly stand, we can hardly tolerate. We all know that. But God is there. And we need to see and learn God. And then whatever we see and learn of God, carry that on to the next event. And if the next event is a blessing, it's a wonderful thing, carry that over. Carry it with you. But the main thing we need to carry with us is go back. It would be a good exercise every day of our lives if we go back to the day the Lord saved us. Just go back there. Relive it again and again and again. Because we forget. We forget. It's just like church, anything. Oh, this is wonderful. I wish we never had to leave. 5 minutes down the road, they've forgotten all about it. It's like it never happened. It's like it never happened. On to something else. God help us to focus and to remember who He is. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us